just in case you accidentally clicked on this, don't look down. I am going to be talking about snakes and tarantulas. No, hear me out. Hear me out. Don't. No, wait. All right, well, they're gone. And whoever's left, I mean, honestly, I don't have to convince you. If you're even willing to listen to this video, you probably don't have an issue with snakes or tarantulas. But I'm going to combine them in this episode only because they seem to be the most common phobias when it comes to animals, and I feel like a little knowledge goes a long way. And it's rough because these are two types of pets that actually make amazing pets. So I'm going to briefly get into some stuff that I know about them. I'm going to talk about snakes, and if you just are here for the snake content, then I'll put a link in the bottom that you can skip to. Same thing with the tarantulas at the end. But I just feel like, yeah, if you have a phobia about a snake or a tarantula, I mean, there's not a whole heck of a lot you can do. You can't reason away a phobia. You can try different methods like immersion therapy. But when it comes to, just having this innate, instinctive fear in you about a certain animal, then me, with my ugly mug, telling you to, get a pet, it makes a great pet, that's not going to cut it. So I get how come this is going to be probably not, it's either going to be a polarizing video or it's not going to help anybody at all. Again, I have info in my heart and I want to share it with the rest of you. So I'm just going to tell you what I know about them. So again, if you're already watching this, then you probably don't need any more convincing, but here goes. So with snakes, they actually make a really decent pet. Same thing with tarantulas. Tarantulas not only make a great pet, but they're also very easy to take care of. But let's just put it this way. In my 10 years of working at a pet store, I have been bitten more by hamsters than I have with snakes and tarantulas combined. Now that's kind of silly to say because I've never actually been bitten by a tarantula in my entire time. An entire decade of working at a pet store, I have never been bitten by a tarantula. And I have been bitten by snakes on occasion, and most of them were from a certain species, corn snakes. I don't want to put corn snakes down. I don't want to convince you against getting one because, let's be honest, when they come in, they're about the size of a pencil. So they are probably very scared about who this giant is reaching their hand in order to rearrange the substrate. So I can't really blame them too much for going after me. It was, in all honesty, probably self-defense, but I've been bitten by them and pretty much only them. Ball pythons, boas, I have not been. And that's in 10 years working with pets, where I came into it not knowing a thing about them. So I probably was making all the wrong darty movements that wasn't supposed to, and again, never got, bit by the other two. And with tarantulas, I've never been bit at all. Compare that to, a lot of the furry creatures that you wouldn't normally think of as biters. I've actually been bitten by guinea pigs more than tarantulas. So, and again, guinea pigs are not a biter. If you looked at my previous episode, guinea pigs, out of the furry ones that we usually carry in the store, are probably one of the least likely to bite. And I've still been bit by more guinea pigs than I have tarantulas. And it's probably toe-to-toe tarantulas and snakes. Anyway, I digress. So when it comes to snakes, they're not slimy. I think that a lot of people know this by now, but they look like they're going to be, but they're not. They're actually very dry and not rough really at all. Their scales are actually quite smooth, and they typically don't need to go after you. They usually go after small game. So the bite factor can be minimized a lot in that regard. And same thing with tarantulas. For the most part, they actually kind of enjoy your body warmth once they get to know you. A lot of times I've had trouble putting a tarantula back into the habitat because they were enjoying my body warmth so much that it's actually oftentimes a great indicator where, oh, is the heat bulb still working? Because one time I had one that I would try and, all right, time to get off, and then they would crawl over to the other side, and then I'd be like, no, it's time to go back in. They would crawl to the other side, and I was like, okay, how cold are you? And then I checked, and sure enough, the heat bulb had broken. The habitat wasn't as warm as it was supposed to be, and that was a good indicator. So I learned a lot of stuff about snakes and tarantulas. So probably start with tarantulas. So there's over 800 species in the world for tarantulas, and none of them are technically venomous enough to kill you. Now, granted, there might be that 0.0001 chance that you are allergic to the venom, but the odds are pretty against that. To be honest, the most likely thing is that they're going to bite you and you're going to be 100% fine. And they're also one of the most easily recognizable species of spider on the planet. So that means that whether you come across one in somebody's home or in the wild, the odds are that you're going to be absolutely fine with whatever encounter happens. In fact, what's funny is that quite a few of them actually have hairs on their butt that they can flick at you. I don't know if you've ever touched the fruit of a prickly pear cactus, but they are so fine that literally even with a magnifying glass and a pair of tweezers, you might not be able to quite get it out, and it's just going to be irritating for days. That actually is more of an annoyance than an actual tarantula bite. I don't know if that's going to help you. It helped me for whatever reason. Just knowing that, oh, I instantly recognize that shape as a tarantula. I know that I'm going to be okay in this encounter, right? You know, there's some spiders out there where it's like, oh, I need medical attention immediately. Even if I get medical attention immediately, the type of venom that they have actually decays the flesh, so either way, I'm going to always have a hole in that spot that they bit me. This is not the case with tarantulas. Same thing with snakes. Again, almost any pet store is not going to keep a rattlesnake or a potentially venomous snake, so the most you're going to have is pinpricks for a bite wound, as opposed to, you know, oh no, you know, I need to get anti-venom, you know, stat. So just keep that in mind. And again, especially when they're young, sometimes their teeth can be so fine that you actually don't even feel it. You only see a speck of blood afterwards because it didn't even hit any nerves. And so we'll get into that later on. But I just felt like knowing those two things, I felt a lot more comforted when it came to me trying to handle them, because it does seem like, you know, the more scared you are, the more jumpy you are, the more you act like prey, and then therefore the more likely they are to strike. It's just, it seems to be always the case when it comes to any animal. It's almost like they can either smell fear or they can read fear on your body language. If you go in with confidence, oftentimes you were right. You come out confident and correct. Oftentimes if you go in with fear, it justifies the fear. It's very weird how it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. So without further ado, so we're going to get into snakes. So yeah, when it comes to them, relatively easy upkeep for a pet, much like, you know, unlike a lot of the ones that, you know, you might initially think to go for, you know, dogs, cats, you know, hamsters, guinea pigs, fish. Snakes and tarantulas are actually one of the more easily taken care of animals. And so obviously you want to get an appropriately sized habitat. With snakes, some of them can get quite large. So we're talking, yes, for right now, the 20-gallon tank is sufficient enough for their current size. But keep in mind, if this is a snake that can grow to 6 feet long, again, I don't want to scare you away. A 6-foot-long snake is not any scarier than just a regular-sized snake, if you know what you're doing. But something can get 6 feet long, so don't just expect to have them in a little aquarium-sized, you know, habitat for their entire lives. That just wouldn't be fair. So, excuse me. Also, different snakes require different conditions, different humidities, also different lighting situations. So I'm going to mention this in many of my videos, but I'm always going to start fresh as though you're listening to it for the first time. But UVB is probably the biggest bane of my existence. It's literally a bulb that simulates natural sunlight so that they get UV rays so that they can then make vitamin D, much like how we use the sun. And this bulb is just so annoying. First of all, you need to do your research to know that your pet actually needs it. So with snakes, some of them don't actually need it. So, for instance, if you're getting a red-tail Colombian, then, for the snake enthusiasts out there, I know, pretty much any snake that's sold in a pet store is not an actual red-tail. Semantics, all right? Let's get to the basics, sir. Then we can get into the specifics later. So, if it's a boa, it actually does need a UVB light. It naturally hunts during the day. It's used to getting those rays, so you do need to have that specialized light. Now, for a ball python, they're typically burrowers. Some of them don't ever actually ever see sunlight. They actually just hunt, you know, through the smell, which it's pretty interesting. But you know, whenever they flick their tongue, they're actually smelling, not tasting the air. It's really neat if you get into it and you start learning all these cool little facts. I mean, that's kind of what got me into animals in the first place. The more you learn about them, the more you're like, well, that is metal. And how did we survive without any of this stuff that they just are innately born with? I think it's amazing. Like, for instance, when I get the spiders, the fact that they can, weave webs and do all that crazy stuff. So, I digress. Um, so yeah, UVB lights are just such a pain in the tuchus because it's a light that it has a certain filament in it, so it'll send the UVB rays. And so you buy it, you set it up, you think you're good, but you actually have to change it out, even though it's still turning on. And this is what ticks me off, is that it's so easy to completely forget when you bought it, and then, oh, it's been that many months, it's time to replace it because the thing still turns on, but it's no longer sending UVB rays out. And so you think the thing's working fine, and then all of a sudden your pet, whether it's a lizard, whether it's a snake, or whatever needs a UVB light, it starts getting lethargic, and you can't figure out why. Why aren't you eating? Why are you acting lethargic? Why are you not, doing what you're supposed to be doing? And 9 times out of 10, if I ever get a call, it's just like, when was the last time you did the UVB bulb? And they're like, oh no, it's still turning on. Okay, that means it's been about a year, and that poor thing is starving for some rays. So, maybe it got lucky and it ended up living because it had some indirect sunlight. But no, yeah, UVBs, definitely, if you're going to be getting one of these guys that needs one, do your research, because it's one of the most finicky bulbs. Anyway, so, with snakes, they obviously like most species like a lot of substrate that has the option for keeping the humidity up pretty high. So, coconut, fiber substrate, something that, most of them need a pretty regular misting and, a pretty high humidity rate. Most of them are from parts of the area where it's pretty much regularly nice and humid. So you definitely want to make sure that whenever you're setting up the habitat, it's going to be away from any direct vents, air currents. They could potentially dry it out faster. You also don't want to oversaturate, because that could also lead to, other issues as well. Nice homeostasis, and do regularly change out the bedding. Now with snakes, they, eat very rarely, they poop very rarely. You might just feel like you can spot clean for a month and, call it good. Well, no, if you do wait too long, I mean, they can develop mites. A lot of stuff can, go on with them. So, that's definitely something to look out for. On the darker scaled snakes too, it's pretty hard to pick out mites. If it's like one of those really light colored ones, you might be able to check between the scales and see the little black dots. But anyway, mites is a thing, and they do have sprays and stuff for that. But anyway, so probably one of the biggest questions that people are going to have about snakes is going to be feeding. So let's just jump right into it. I get it. You're feeding another creature to the creature that you have. And what's funny is that most people that, see a mouse, for instance, is the most common example. They might be like, oh, well, I can't do that to that poor mouse. And yet they could easily have a lizard that eats live crickets and think nothing of the cricket. I don't know what kind of weird system we rate our pets in, that one is more important or higher rated than the other. It's very debatable, especially if you happen to have one that you have loved and cared for years. Also, that's a big thing, is when you're getting a snake, do keep in mind about the length of life a snake can have. That's something that a lot of people don't think about long term. I get into it with lizards, but because, for instance, a leopard gecko can live 22 years. So don't just let this. I didn't even do the disclaimer at the beginning. Don't just let this be your end all be all for information. You definitely want to check out your own stuff. But yeah, lifespan is always a big thing, because you got to be thinking about the fact that it's like, if it does get to a certain size, obviously mice and rats aren't going to cut it. You're going to have to go for a bigger animal. So that's something to plan for as well. But anyway, back to feeding them. So that's probably a lot of people's biggest reason why they probably wouldn't want to get one, is that they picture in their heads that you buy a mouse at a pet store alive, and then you get it to there, you drop it in the tank, the snake attacks the mouse, the mouse like lets out its death throes, and while the snake squeezes it and stuff. That is not necessarily the case at all. In fact, it is highly recommended to feed frozen, because it actually helps keep them more docile. If they're not used to trying to hunt down and kill a moving thing, then they're going to be a lot less likely to accidentally mistake your hand for food, which 9 times out of 10, once they've gotten used to the routine and they realize, oh, this big creature is not out to kill me, this is actually here to provide my food, then the only time that you usually would get bit is if the snake is hungry and mistakes your hand going into the habitat for a food source. They didn't mean to. They're just like, oh, shoot, that was your hand. That wasn't a mouse. So keep that in mind. Again, that's the reason why you don't really get bit that often by them. Anyway, so frozen, they come in a bag in the freezer. You thaw them out. You feed it to them. It's a lot better of a way to do it. So now here's the problem, is that a lot of people have snakes that have only ever done live, and they think that they can only ever do live. Now, again, it's really weird. Just real quick, as an aside, I've worked at a pet store, again, for 10 years, so I have this weird relationship with animals where I could easily keep mice as a pet if I wasn't so allergic. I could easily keep mice as a pet. I could give them names. I could love them. I could buy them, accessories and treats, and, have them roll around in a ball. And when they die, I would be very sad and possibly even bury them in my backyard. And I could easily also buy one as a feeder and give it to the snake and honestly be just like, okay, well, that's the circle of life. So I don't know if it's because I've seen so many accidental breedings of mice that it's like, okay, they're fine. It isn't like they're going to go extinct anytime soon. Mice know how to continue existing in this world. They're going to be okay. The occasional one to a snake is not going to be a big deal. Or if it's just, a desensitization. I don't know if it is, though, because honestly, I would really care and miss and, probably shed a tear once, my pet mouse died. So I don't know. It's a really weird, unique way that I have of looking at it, just being exposed for almost a decade. But anyway, I digress. Going back to frozen versus live. So live, if it's a snake that has lived that way their entire lives, yes, it is going to be very difficult to get them back to frozen. So here's an awesome tip that I learned from an actual snake breeder that I am going to pass on to you for actually sticking through it this long. You get to have this nice little awesome tidbit if you're like, I really want to go back to frozen. I hear it makes them more docile. I hear it's better. So also there's less chance of them scratching the snake. So let's say the snake is not in the mood for eating. So they actually would not go after the mouse. And if the mouse is in there long enough, they might actually just get up on the snake and start scratching its back. It's funny to think that, the snake would have to be worried about the mouse, but that is actually the case. If the snake isn't in the right mood and they're trapped in a cage together, that actually can happen. The mouse can actually damage a lethargic snake. So keep that in mind. Keep an eye on them when they're getting fed. Anyway, so if you have a snake that's eating live and you want to try and move on to frozen, here's what you want to do. So you don't want to soak the frozen mouse in water. The reason for that is because water will wash away the mousy smell to them. So what he said that he does is that he actually has the heat lamp on top of the habitat. So what he does is he just throws the frozen one by there, lets it warm up naturally that way. And then once it's a decent temperature, what he would do was he would take a cup of water, water about coffee temperature, if you can picture it in your head, so about the temperature of a cup of coffee. And so once that mouse was warmed up and relatively dry, all he would do would be dunking the head in for about 1 second. And the reason for this is twofold. So a snake is going to attack the warm part of the body, so that's the head. You also want the snake to attack the head, because if it goes butt first, it's just the way that the mouse is shaped. If it goes in head first, it's going to be a lot more healthy for the snake as opposed to going rear end first. So a lot of young snakes don't realize the importance of this. So if they go after the head first, it's going to just be a lot more beneficial for them. And also, you only rinsed a little bit of the mouse smell away from the head. You didn't rinse it away from the rest of the body. So you ideally take tongs. You don't want to be doing it barehanded unless you and the snake are really good friends. But you usually want to take some tongs, and so you take the now heated up mouse, and then you do a little wiggle in front of their face, and if they're hungry enough, they usually will just latch right on, coil up, and you're good to go. If you do, have to feed live until you can get to that frozen point, I guess it depends on the person, on the snake. I guess females are more likely to not be as scratchy as a male mouse. Unfortunately, when you're working at a pet store, a lot of people want to have mice as pets as well. So typically we try to suggest the males because female mice, as a general rule, get together in the same habitat a little bit easier than males. Sometimes males will scratch the back. Also, we always try and encourage white ones because white ones are probably the least popular for pets. And so when they have those spots all over them like a cow, those are the ones that usually end up getting a home as a pet. So we usually try and encourage people to do a male and a white. And like I was saying earlier, unfortunately, if a snake has eaten a specific type for a long enough time, like for instance white male mice, they might only now want to eat white male mice that are alive because they've eaten it enough times that they haven't gotten sick. So they're like, okay, I know that this food source works great. Let's keep on doing more of that. So, again, moving them over to frozen is something I highly recommend. I don't know how successful you will be at it, but while we're talking about feeding, let's get into when and where is a good um, place to feed them. So, there's two different methods, and it seems like if you talk to 100 people, 50 of them will say one and 50 of them will say the other. So let's go ahead and cover the tub method real quick. So a lot of people suggest if you feed the snake that you take them out of the habitat, you put them into a separate container, like just a big tub that you would normally store like clothes or something in, Christmas decorations. So you put them in a tub, with said mouse or whatever food source, and then that way they always know, okay, if you're reaching into the habitat to do a spot clean or whatever, well, I don't eat here, I eat in the tub, so clearly that hand is not going to be a food source, and then therefore I don't need to attack it. That's one school of thought. Another school of thought, and this is one that I'm more apt to lean towards, but you don't necessarily, make your own decisions, do your research. This is just the one that I find make more sense, is that you feed them directly in the habitat. So they're getting hungry, you do a little wiggle with the mouse, and then they go into the habitat. And then this way, anytime you actually want to take them out to socialize, because they can be a very social creature. Like, there's been snakes in movies and on photo shoots. They actually can be very, tame when they've been handled often enough. So if you actually want to interact with your snake more than not, I recommend this method where you just feed them in the habitat, and then when you take them out, whether it's with a snake hook or your bare hands, and they're out of the habitat, well, then they're like, well, clearly this isn't where I eat. I only eat in the habitat. So if I'm out, it's to socialize, and then they have absolutely no issues being out of their habitat as far as their attitude goes. So I like that method. It seems to make more sense to me. Again, I want you to do what you want, do your own research, make your own decisions, and maybe even get back to me in the comment section. Let me know how one worked over the other. But so snake hooks, are a way to get them out of the habitat, or just reaching in with your bare hands. They do like to crawl all over stuff. A lot of them do like their hidey holes. So if you are going to have a hidey hole, for a snake that they can fit in, by the way, then don't expect to see too much of them. That's probably going to be their favorite place to hang out. So you're probably only going to get a lot of interaction with them when it actually comes time to take them out of the habitat. Again, why I kind of lean towards that. So you have heating elements. My favorite is the pad on the tank. The heating lamps are great. The ceramic heaters are cool. UVB lights are important, but they're not usually as a source of heat unless you're doing a combo, which I can't recommend, because if the UVB light burns out but the heating element is still working, you're going to be torn, because you're like, I don't want to replace this $75 or whatever it is bulb because it's still turning on, but I know that it's been enough months that the UVB isn't working, so I need to replace that. So, keep that in mind as well when you're doing that. So heat and humidity is super important for maintaining, giving them enough space. The feeding methods are important. Oftentimes if they have any shed, this is going to be a big thing. So they are going to have times when you just need to leave them the heck alone, all right? And that's going to be true about tarantulas when we get to them as well. But with snakes, if they are about to shed, and you'll usually notice because they're going to turn a little more pale, especially if they have anything over their eyes. I know it might be the time to feed them, but just don't even bother. Let them do the shed first, because they can't really see. When they have the shed over their eyes, everything's kind of very milky. This isn't a good time for you to be reaching your hand in to do cleaning maintenance, because again, they might confuse whatever that wiggly thing is in their very, very limited vision. Just kind of leave them alone for the shed. Two things that'll help with the shed is, again, keeping the humidity where it's supposed to be, having a bowl of water that they can not only drink from but also soak in, but also, anything, something rough in there, like that's naturally or artificially rough for them to scrape up against. And honestly, if you're doing all the things right in the habitat, most of them can do a shed all in one piece, which I always find very oddly satisfying for some reason. If some of the conditions aren't quite right, it might come off in pieces. Be very, very careful. Again, do your research about if and when you want to help them get any of the stuck shed off of them, because you could actually be ripping scales off and making it worse rather than better. Oftentimes, usually just the best rule of thumb is soak, soak, soak. Hose them down with some water, let them soak in the bowl, let it happen naturally as opposed to trying to help them off. But we'll get into that when we get into lizards and stuff later. There are some that if they just, grew up wrong, they're going to need help anyway. But with snakes, generally, you just let them take care of business on their own. So yeah, try not to feed when that happens. Also, don't panic if they don't eat for a couple weeks to even a few months at a time. By nature, they usually would be out in the wild and having a winter spell. So they naturally have this tendency to not eat for some months at a time because they normally would slow down as far as their speed and activity goes, and don't necessarily think they have to rush to the vet unless they're showing signs of other signs. They, not that I would ever recommend it, but like these guys are crazy. If they're big enough, they can actually live up to a year without any food. Although then there's a chance that they might not ever come back from it. I got lucky enough that I did actually rehabilitate a snake from near death that hadn't eaten in a year. Its face was never the same again because it just had rubbed up against the glass for so long that, unfortunately the scales never grew back, but it did make a full recovery, which I felt really good about. This is actually the only reason why I'm making this video. The only reason why I am a snake guy is because I actually took, I think it was a 5-foot at the time, red-tailed boa that hadn't eaten in a year, and I managed to nurse it back to health. The vet gave it a 50-50 shot, and I remember the moment very distinctly. For those of you sticking around, here's a little inside info. That I had been using a ceramic heater for the heat, and against all odds, it broke. This is something that should last like a lifetime. Ceramic heaters should not break. It's literally just ceramic that you're heating up. So I don't know what went wrong, but I noticed that it was cold to the touch, and it was late in the day. So the stores had already closed, so the poor thing was going to have to be cold overnight. So I was like, well, I was planning on having a late night anyway. So I gathered up the snake, who by this point had finally gotten a lot more active. When I first started doing the injections, it didn't even move away from the pain. Like, this is how bad off this snake was. And so, like, by, injection number 3, it went, ow! And I called the vet in a panic. I was like, oh my God, did I hit a nerve or something? And the vet was like, no, it hurts. The snake is actually getting energetic enough to go, ow, like, let's get away from the pain. So that's a good sign. Like, you're doing something right. So I was like, oh, okay, thank you. So, poor cold snake. I get him on the lap, and I turn on the TV, and I'm watching TV. And at first, he tries to escape into the, into the couch cushions, and I keep just kind of repositioning him back on my lap. And finally, he just is like, all right, well, you know what? You get some good body heat, so I'll just settle up on your lap, and I'll, hang out here. And so about an hour or so goes by. And I was living with my sister at the time. She comes into the apartment, and so she goes, "Hey, Nick!" Ah! And I was like, "Hey, what? Oh, right. I have a 5-foot snake on my lap. Apparently, if I could forget that during an episode of whatever I was watching, I guess I'm a snake guy now." So it actually took a snake on death's door for me to get over. I was never phobic about them, which is I think the only reason why that worked is that I just never really cared for them. Somebody would be like, "Oh, look at this beautiful snake. You want to see?" And I'd be like, "I'm okay. I'm not really afraid of them, but I also have no interest in them either." And after nursing one back to health, well, by gosh, if I'm not snake guy, if I can forget having a 5 to 6 foot snake on my lap. So anyway, that's why I love them. That's why I think that you should give them a shot if you ever get a chance. And I think that's good enough for now. I'm probably missing out on a lot of stuff. But without further ado, I feel like the tarantula people have waited long enough. So I'm going to move on to them. I'm going to mark the time when I rewatch this so I can hopefully do the links in the bottom if I remember. If I don't, shout me out in the comments. Go ahead and rip me a new one. It's all good. So, tarantulas. There's no way to not awkwardly do that transition. Anyway, tarantulas. I'm not going to have a whole lot to say on them because they actually are deceptively easy to take care of. When you finally know what you're doing, it's amazing. So, like, yes, like most any other habitats, you want to keep the humidity up. Yes, you want to change out the substrate on a pretty regular basis just so that there's not, mites or something nasty growing in them, all right? But for the most part, it just comes to two things, maybe three. One is just not overfeeding them. They eat very little. When it comes to something that eats crickets, these guys eat the least amount of pretty much any animal that I've ever had in a pet store. We're talking maybe it's like 6 to 7 crickets, depending on the size of the lizard, a day. Whereas it might be, 6 to 7 crickets a month for a tarantula? I mean, they do not eat that much, is what I'm trying to get at. So you don't want to have a whole bunch of crickets or whatever they happen to be eating at the time. I don't care, I don't know what size they are. So some of them actually get big enough that you can feed other stuff. But for the most part, usually for tarantula, it's crickets is the main staple. And you usually don't want to do about one at a time. They, like I said, don't eat much. So if they've had their fill and then they're not really hungry, it's weird how a lot of animals do this, like reptiles, and tarantulas. If they've eaten their fill, they'll just let crickets crawl all over them, bite them. And it's like, all right, well, you could easily kill them. Like, I know that it's not time, you're not hungry, but you're not going to just bite them back, even just because of the sheer annoyance factor. No. Oftentimes they'll let them harass them. It's very odd. So, usually with the tarantula, you can just, wait until they're ready to eat to go to the pet store. It's not going to be too much out of your way. If you do want to keep a cricket keeper, oftentimes crickets are notoriously hard to take care of. So you might actually lose more money to crickets than you would in just doing the extra gas when it's as needed, is I guess what I'm trying to say. So keep that in mind. Do not overfeed them. Also, here's a big one. The big one with the tarantulas is that when it comes to their molting, so, just like, reptiles and quite a few different species, they have a hard external shell. So as they grow, once that shell gets too tight, they have to wiggle out of it, and then they're going to, be soft and vulnerable for a few days, and then that toughens up, and then, the cycle continues. So when it comes time for them to molt, you need to leave them the heck alone. You need to scoop any crickets that are in there out of there, all right? Crickets will actually... One cricket in a habitat with a spider that's molting could potentially kill them. It seems crazy, but it is very true. They need to be left alone. If they're on their back, legs up, don't instantly think that they've died and try and manhandle them. More likely than not, they are molting. Don't try and flip them back upright. Don't try and give them a burial. All right, they're probably just getting out of their old shell. So, don't fret. And I think 9 times out of 10, I've noticed that they usually like to be on their back for it because they break out of their back first. So they're basically keeping their legs up at the top as they, get out of it, so that their sensitive, side is exposed to the rest of the world for the least amount. Whether they decide to molt on their back or rarely on their, upright, don't think that one is better than the other and move them. They decided where to go on their own. If you move them, oftentimes that's not what they wanted to, and they'll have stuck shed left on them. Stuff like that. Also, what's really cool is that in a way, during that molting process, they can kind of regenerate. So sometimes they might have a accident where like one of their legs get kind of busted or something at the end, and then after a couple of molts, they actually have a whole leg again. It's pretty cool. But anyway, when it comes to handling them, much like any other thing, almost every animal in the entire kingdom has a body language to them. So if you want to play with them and they don't want to play with you, oftentimes they'll let you know by scrunching their legs up to their body, maybe even, waving their front legs out, in a danger dance or whatever. Watch a couple videos. This isn't the one. Watch a couple videos of, tarantula body language to get a rough idea of, when they're willing to hang out with you or not. But again, if you go at their pace, you'd be amazed at how much they actually do enjoy being handled. Oftentimes, a tarantula habitat is small by nature, which is not that horrible. It gives them less hunting that they have to do for their crickets and stuff, but they get bored just as much as we do. So oftentimes they enjoy a good outing. They like to be, taken out, going to a higher spot, like getting your body warmth and stuff. And again, if they're not against the idea, you're not going to get bit. You're not going to get butt hairs flicked at you. In fact, they're gonna desperately cling onto your hand as you're trying to get them back into the habitat. It's happened to me multiple times where they're like, no, 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 I don't want to go. No, no, wait, I don't want to go. Which seems scary at first. Like, there's nothing scarier than like you're trying to, like dump spider in a cup out, and then they, go on the cup and then they climb up your arm. Like, obviously that's one of the more terrifying things, even to me to this day. If it's a spider that I can't identify, that I'm trying to gently, get out and outside without killing it, because I try not to, but if it doesn't do what I wanted it to do, it can be a jeez moment for a second. So do your best not to do that with spiders. The jumpy movements is going to scare them more than it's going to scare you, and that actually might incite them to bite. Like I said, if you just skipped to this part, I'm going to just reiterate real quick. So normally what I'm mostly talking about is tarantulas, because that's the most common one to have. Tarantulas are cool. They got 800 different species. None of them are deadly unless you happen to be allergic, which is a very rare thing. You actually want to be more afraid of their butt hairs rather than their teeth, because they flick their butt hairs. It's like a prickly pear cactus fruit needle, where it's almost microscopic. It's just very irritating for days. It's just more of an irritating, like splinter feel than it is a actual like ouch, ouch, I got bit, I've been hurt, I've been stung, kind of deal. So and that's actually a great indicator about how a spider's mental health is doing. If you notice a very bare butt on a tarantula, the odds are that they've been just flicking their butt hairs just through like sheer anxiety, and that's not good. You want to see a nice, fully covered, very hairy butt on a tarantula. I don't know why I just giggled, but it's just I just realized that to somebody who's not as knowledgeable about the pet world, talking about hairy butts as being healthy. The juvenile part of me just kind of had a little giggle, because I'm just throwing these sentences away like I've been saying them for years, which I have, and I realize there's some people that might be watching going, did he really just say a healthy hairy butt? Yeah, well, when it comes to a spider, or a tarantula rather, yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about. So some signs that they're feeling pretty good is quite a few of the species will be making a little it almost looks like morning dew on the topsoil. They're trying to set up traps and stuff, and some of them will like burrow a little bit into the substrate so they can get like a nice little place to hang out at. But yeah, so when it comes to spiders, it's like there's very little upkeep. Keep them humid. Change the bedding every once in a while. Don't overfeed them. Leave them alone when they're molting. Especially the first couple of times you go to handle them, try and have it be their idea. But then after that, especially if they know you, you can usually just go ahead and scoop them up at any point in time, and they're probably going to be okay with it. And yeah, they make surprisingly great pets. It surprised a lot of people. And again, if you didn't skip through and you just watch this whole thing, I know I'm reiterating myself, but I am giving people the option. So I want to make sure that they know that I have never been bitten. Almost 10 years about working at a pet store, and I was never bit by a tarantula once. I was bit by snakes. I was bit, very rarely by snakes. So don't deter that from you from having a snake if you skip just to the tarantula part. I snuck snake in there on you, but the most that I've been bit by are those cute, furry, sweet little things that you thought that would be a great first-time pet. I got bit more by hamsters and mice and guinea pigs than I ever was by tarantulas especially, but even by snakes and stuff. So just keep that in mind. Like you'd be surprised thinking that a good beginner animal would be one of the cute ones, but once you learn enough about them, I think that these guys are cute in their own right. I think it's really fun, to watch a spider pounce on a cricket. I think it's just an absolute blast having them crawl all over you like you're their own personal jungle gym, and knowing that barring some really weird, crazy, unforeseen thing, there's literally no reason why a tarantula that's crawling all over you, exploring you, is going to bite. So, I don't know. I don't know if this helped anybody at all. This is probably going to be my least viewed and least interested in episode, because I guarantee you that the people that have no interest in this were never going to click on me, so I was never going to convince them anyway. The people that are watching, I'm giving very basic knowledge of, so if you're already an enthusiast, you're like, I could write a book on what you just did not talk about. So, I'm not sure who this is for, but I feel like it's just important enough that I've finally gotten enough of my life that I've, actually gotten some interesting feelings that I never thought that I would have for snakes. I didn't realize I'd ever like them. I didn't ever realize that I would nurse one back from the death. I didn't realize that I would not only enjoy tarantulas, but that one could be placed upon my face in a party situation where back in my 20s I passed out with my shoes on the couch, which everybody knows is a party foul, and so somebody thought it would be a good idea to take a tarantula out and put it on my chest and wake me up that way. And honestly, thank God I was already cool with tarantulas by that point, because all I can think of to this day is not, oh, how funny would that have been if I had freaked out, but like, what if I had accidentally, hurt the tarantula by, panic mode? So, thankfully I drunkenly woke up, looked down at my chest and said, hey, what's going on, girl? You know, so I've had a very unique experience when it comes to animals, and if you had told 10-year-old me that I'd be a snake guy or a tarantula guy, I would have told you to, go kick sand or whatever, but it's the case now. And if I even, manage to convince that one person to change their mind, I mean, it's hilarious. I have a former coworker that, ended up becoming in charge of the animals, and so did not, refused to order tarantulas, and then the corporation made it mandatory that at least one of the habitats was to the tarantula. So eventually, just by sheer like you got to deal with it kind of thing, um, what is she on now? Number 5 by this point. I think she's on might be on like number 4 or 5. She's now obsessed. She now is like going to expos to get tarantulas. So I mean, if she can do it, and you don't have a just debilitating phobia about it, I think you can do it too. Give them a chance. They're awesome pets, and snakes as well. I appreciate it, you guys. Again, I might just be talking to dead space here because I don't know who this is for, but hopefully it finds the right person. And yeah, I hope that you found a new. I hope that you became a new forever home for one of the most unlikeliest of creatures.